Hello to everybody, my name is Stefano and welcome to this episode of the Think and Analyze podcast. So today we will talk about the self-defeating prophecy. Now, first and foremost, the inspiration for this episode came from the reading of the book Social Theory and Social Structure by Robert Merton, who is a sociologist. And also, while I was getting informed, I was reading this book, and afterwards I looked for this self-fulfilling prophecy on the internet. I found that actually, and also by reading the book, I found that actually Robert Merton was also the sort of creator of the self-fulfilling prophecy, which is something I have already covered in a previous episode. But in this previous episode, I said that the inspiration for the self-fulfilling prophecy came from the reading of Pragmatics of Human Communication. Now, it is true that the inspiration came from that book, Pragmatics of Human Communication, but I also wanted to give credit to Merton because um, he is probably, as I have seen, for what I've seen, he is probably the original creator, founder of these expressions. So, with that said, let's dive right into this topic. First and foremost, what is a self-defeating prophecy? Well, basically, it is the opposite of the self-fulfilling prophecy. And also, by the way, as a side note, if you haven't watched that video, I highly suggest you to watch it. A self-fulfilling prophecy is a behavior or a prediction that does not cause what it claimed to cause. And it is hard for me to explain it in the same fashion I did with the self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, in the same fashion I did in the other episode with the self-fulfilling prophecy, because for what I have understood, the self-defeating prophecy is much more simple, and also when it happens much more briefly. It's really something you can really pick on, and I will talk about why in a second. I want I will talk about that in a second because I now want to give you some examples so that you have a better understanding of what is actually being talked about. So, in the book I was reading, Social Theory and Social Structure, there are, I believe, like a few examples. One of them is the example of the overproduction of wheat, which is basically the following. If some kind of expert is questioned about the sort of process of the production of wheat, and this expert says that in a month or two there will be an overproduction of wheat. Since the listeners of this expert are highly likely those who produce, who produce wheat, after having uh, after having heard that there will be an overproduction of wheat, the very producers of wheat will actually diminish their production of wheat in order not to have the problems which an overproduction of wheat will cause. And so, as a consequence, in the end, after 1 month or two, there will not be actually any overproduction of wheat because the expert predicted that there would have been an overproduction of wheat, but since the producers of wheat do not want to have an overproduction of wheat, they will actually act in order not to have an overproduction, and as a consequence, no overproduction will happen, and so the expert will have said a self-fulfilling prophecy. So he he predicted that in the near future there would have been an overproduction of wheat, when actually after that time nothing really happened. So I explained this like making some sort of repetitions, so that you get a really good understanding. Another example is the example of losing a match, and this happened to me many times. Well, not actually many times, but sometimes. Generally speaking, I had trouble playing tennis with the self-fulfilling prophecy, but I digress. The example of losing a match in any sport, but I will use the example of tennis just because it is much more. I have more experience in that, and I prefer that. If I am going to play a match against someone, and I know that my level of tennis is much higher than his, what might happen is I might say to myself, this is going to be easy. I don't need to concentrate that much. I don't need to focus that much, because I'm simply going to beat it almost without any sort of any difficulty, without putting any kind of attention in the match. And as a consequence of this, of this thought that I have, as a consequence of this mindset I have, I end up losing the match, because uh, I was not focused in winning the match. I was uh, too much not focused. I guess you can say that. Too less focused. I don't know how you could say that. Um, I wasn't. That's what I want. I wasn't focused enough in order to win the match. So I ended up telling me a self-defeating prophecy. I thought that I could win the match, and so I didn't really have to focus on the match. And in the end, I actually didn't focus in the match, but I lost the match. One final example I want to make, and was really fun in my opinion, and kind of interesting. And I'm going to explain in a second why. Um, some time ago, I believe like a year ago, I had an oral test with a teacher of mine in high school. Okay, and it was not like a normal oral test, because the teacher simply wanted me to give this oral test so that I could sort of raise my average mark in the subject, which was history. And so that was not really a day of oral test in which I had to be prepared, like of course it was more of a day, like if you want to give this oral test you can. And that day that teacher really sort of told me that I could give this oral test, and I responded that I actually couldn't, because I hadn't really studied that much, because I was almost giving up on the subject. I really thought that I couldn't really do better than I was already doing, and so I really didn't study. I hadn't studied um, in order to raise my average mark. Um, after having said that, the teacher, however, insisted. They told me that I could do that it was actually easy, that I had a possibility, and all those kind of things. So in the end, just because I wanted to like that was something a little bit immature in my opinion. I simply wanted to show the teacher that actually that was not I couldn't really do that much. So I ended up giving the oral test. And what happened? The teacher asked me some kind of questions, which actually I was able to answer. And so I ended up getting a decent mark, not something like over the top, not something uh, successful or anything like that. A decent mark. It was basically a little above my average mark. And so after this happened, the teacher told me that they were right, and I should have believed them because, as I saw, um, the questions were I could answer the questions they asked me. However, that is an example, in my opinion, from my perspective, of a self-defeating prophecy, because, in my opinion, when I told the teacher that I couldn't really do that oral test really, really well, in my opinion, that influenced the teacher, and so they ended up asking me easy questions. And actually, I told them this theory. I told them that actually, in my opinion, I had influenced them, and so they ended up asking me easy questions, and they told me that actually it was not. Now, I can't actually remember if the questions they asked me were prepared or not. I believe they were prepared, and so that is something like in the teacher's favor instead of the favor of me for for the sort of verification of my theory. But in my opinion, some kind of influence actually happened, and so the teacher might have unconsciously helped me, sort of giving me a little bit more easy questions, not necessarily much more easy, but a little bit, so that my lack of knowledge was sort of um, covered, and I could in the end answer those questions. So those are all examples. Also to say that these situations, just like in the self-fulfilling prophecy, do not happen rarely, like occasionally. In my opinion, they actually happen really often. It's just that they happen so often that we actually don't pay attention to them. Now, the self-defeating prophecy is something difficult to deal with because of the following reasons. If something happens, you can't really prove afterwards in any tangible way that it was a self-defeating prophecy, because it could have been due to other factors. So, for example, in the oral test, I ended up telling the teacher that I believed I had influenced them, and I said that afterwards. So I couldn't really prove my point because um, my theory was about simply the mind of my mind and her and the teacher's mind. So it was not something that you could clearly see who was right and who was wrong. And so this is one aspect. On the other end, sort of like going deeper into this analysis, if you publicly say that a self-fulfilling prophecy is about to happen, then, and this is really interesting in my opinion, then you are likely doing a self-fulfilling prophecy about the self-fulfilling prophecy. You are thus doing a meta self-fulfilling prophecy. And so the original self-fulfilling prophecy won't happen. So to go back to the example of the oral test, because in my opinion, I believe that is like the most the easiest, sorry, to explain. If if this had to happen, so if I had to make some sort of meta self-fulfilling prophecy, it would have been with me telling the teacher before giving the oral test. It would have been with me telling the teacher, listen, I'm now going to say that I won't be able to do this oral test, and by me telling, like I'm quoting the exact same words, of what I would have said. By me telling you that I won't be able to give this oral test, um, you will actually give me easy questions that I can answer pretty easily, and so I will actually end up being able to give this oral test. And so, if I had like explicitly told this, if the meta self-defeating prophecy had to happen, what would have happened? The teacher would have sort of acted as a consequence of me telling the teacher that they would have asked me easy questions, and by as a consequence of me telling them that, they would have actually ended up asking me hard questions. And so, in the end, I couldn't really prove my point because it is as if we are back in the same situation. I had predicted something and it didn't actually happen. So I couldn't have I couldn't really say at that point to the teacher, look, I told you that you would have asked me easy questions, and as a consequence, you asked me hard questions, and that's why I wasn't really able to answer those questions. Because just like before, I couldn't really have, I wouldn't have any tangible proof of what was going on, because this is all about influencing each other's mind, and the mind, of course, you cannot like open someone's brain and see like pointing out a specific area that is a proof of what you are saying. So that would have been a meta self-defeating prophecy, but in the end, the situation would have been the same. So another thing that one might sort of think at this point is that the only way to prove that you are right is to write your self-defeating prophecy down and then show your prediction publicly. So, for example, I say something to the public and I write it down that by me saying this to the public, it will actually not happen what I just said. And then after something has happened, I'm going to show that publicly so that everyone knows that I was right. But even then, it could have been random. So I could have just I could just had I could just have had luck, and so random case, and so it is not really anything tangible. And in any case, it would have not, and this is like the serious answer, it would have not served any purpose besides me knowing I was right. So it is something like, okay, you proved your point, but actually you didn't really do something helpful for the society. So that is like really something you can't really deal with it. So there is an infinite loop, basically. And whereas the self-fulfilling prophecy, as I told you in the previous episode, can be broken up like in the middle of it, so you can actually break the loop and get out of the self-fulfilling prophecy, or at least I explained to you a possible answer to that, which my opinion is correct. In the case of the self-defeating prophecy, you can't really do that. So I guess that the only way to deal with this self-defeating prophecy is simply to accept it and go on with your life. Not that by doing this you won't actually influence the self-defeating prophecy. Because as soon as you enter the loop, there is really nothing you can do which won't affect the course of the event. And the very fact that you don't do anything, that might actually influence the self-fulfilling prophecy. So really, I believe that you should opt for the most the easiest approach, the most healthy approach for you, which is, as I said, simply to accept the situation, the contradictory situation, and go on with your life, because it's best for you psychologically. Because if you tried to fix that situation, we saw that it is not actually possible. So you would end up being frustrated because you can't really fix anything. So, in my opinion, the best is simply accept and go on. And I believe that actually, sort of with the I couldn't with time, you by doing that you could develop such a strong mind that in the end you end up actually breaking the loop of the self-fulfilling prophecy. You end up actually knowing that what was said, the behavior that was the self-fulfilling prophecy, actually didn't influence you. And so just in that case you are breaking the loop. But remember, we are talking about the human mind, so nothing can really be uh, tangible and verified. However, um, we can have some little sort of insight of what was actually happening inside us. And so, if you develop this strong mind, you could actually be almost sure that that specific thing didn't really influence you. But as I said, it really takes time. However, and this is the final thought I want to make, you want to be aware of this self-fulfilling prophecy, because until now we talked about sort of the perfect self-fulfilling prophecy, which is not breakable, I guess you can say that, which is something you cannot break in any way. And that, as I said, would be the perfect self-fulfilling prophecy. But if for some reason or another the situation can actually be fixed, meaning that you are not actually involved in a perfect self-fulfilling prophecy, but you are involved in a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, and so you are aware of this possibility, you are ready to fix it, because you could see, being aware, what I mean by this is being aware of the self-fulfilling prophecy, and being in a situation in which actually something can be done in order to fix it, you could clearly sort of point out what behavior you have to avoid in order not to avoid again in the self-fulfilling prophecy. And you can also point out what behavior is the best in order to fix the situation you're in. So that is it for today's episode. Like, this concept of self-fulfilling prophecy and self-fulfilling prophecy, that really fascinates me a lot. I don't know why, honestly, because it is something like quite for itself, meaning that you can't really, I mean, it is a description, but actually there's nothing we can do. Um, well, I should say there's something we can do, but it is pretty hard to do that, and so those kind of things. But still, this concepts really trigger some interest in me. So I hope it was interesting to you too. And with that said, see you guys.